Imagine a machine so absolutely massive that it spans an entire continent. It's so complex, it has to balance supply and demand at the literal speed of light. And it's so critical that if it stops, modern civilization basically just halts. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping right onto the digital and physical front lines of a seriously high-stakes battle. We are talking about defending the bulk electric system from relentless threats and diving into the intricate, mandatory systems that are keeping the lights on for all of us. Okay, let's dive right into this.
There's a pretty chilling reality in the electric sector. Downtime isn't an option. The bulk electric system faces cyber and physical attacks every single day. And we aren't just talking about a temporary inconvenience here. We are talking about a scenario where a failure means total catastrophe. Hospitals, communications, water supplies, literally everything relies on this continuous flow of energy. The villain of our story is darkness, and the margin for error is absolute zero.
Think of the bulk electric system, or the BES, kind of like a massive, besieged city. It's not just one single thing. It's a sprawling network of generation plants, like those massive cooling towers and solar fields, combined with thousands of miles of transmission lines, not to mention the highly sensitive operational technology sitting inside those control rooms. Every single generator, load, and piece of transmission has to reside within heavily monitored boundaries. They all have to be shielded from both hackers trying to breach the data and physical saboteurs looking to destroy the hardware itself.
So how exactly do you defend something this unbelievably vast? Well, we start with Section 1, the High Council.
The history here is actually super fascinating. NERC, that's the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, was formed by the electric utility industry back in 1968, and they basically act as the ultimate High Council. Their entire purpose is to bring order to the chaos and promote the reliability of electric utilities all across North America. They author the critical rules of survival for the grid. Honestly, without NERC, we just have this fragmented, highly vulnerable patchwork of power companies.
Now, to actually enforce that survival, NERC publishes some seriously strict operating rules. The most vital of these are the CIP reliability standards. That stands for Critical Infrastructure Protection. You can think of these as the mandatory, almost classified defense blueprints. These standards give organizations a really structured approach to safeguard the assets that are essential to the BES. They address everything from unauthorized access and supply chain vulnerabilities to outright sabotage and malicious data breaches. It's pretty much the ultimate playbook for grid defense.
But listen, a High Council needs generals out there on the battlefield, right? Which brings us to Section 2, the 8 regional enforcers. Think of these guys as a roster of specialized units tasked with securing their own specific sectors. We've got the FRCC down in Florida, the MRO in the Midwest, NPCC up in the Northeast, RFC or Reliability First, the SCRC in the Southeast, SPP in the Southwest, the TRE in Texas, and finally the WECC out west. Each of these organizations is absolutely responsible for ensuring that their defined piece of the bulk electric system is reliable, adequate, and most importantly, secure.
And right within these regions, you have the Reliability Coordinator, or RC. Now, these are the folks with the absolute highest level of authority in real-time operations. They're basically the overarching commanders equipped with a wide area view of the whole system. Their operating tools and procedures give them the exclusive authority to see the big picture. If something goes wrong, they can step in instantly to prevent or mitigate an emergency situation long before it can cascade into a wide-scale blackout.
To really see how this plays out on the ground, let's zoom in a bit. Section 3, Spotlight, the Lone Star Enforcer.
Okay, so the Texas or TRE, has to manage the ERCOT region, which is essentially an interconnection entirely unto itself. One of their most critical defense protocols is maintaining what's called the primary frequency response. Think of frequency as the literal heartbeat of the power grid. If that heartbeat drops, the grid dies. So the TRE mandates that generators must automatically step in to arrest and stabilize any dangerous frequency deviations the very second they occur.
And they don't just ask nicely for this either. They measure it with incredible precision. The magic number here is 0.75. According to the regional standards, each generator owner has to meet a minimum 12-month rolling average initial primary frequency response performance of 0.75. And they evaluate this based on how that generator participates in at least 8 frequency measurable events. It's a ridiculously strict performance metric, just to prove that when a disturbance hits, that generator is going to hold the line.
So, to set the stakes for that performance metric, Texas RTE uses something called the IMFR, the Interconnection Minimum Frequency Response. What's really fascinating here is that the TRTE actually calculates this absolute baseline limit every single December. By locking in the IMFR in December, they establish the safety net, the mathematical rules of survival, really, for the entire Texas region for the upcoming year. It's totally proactive, predictive defense.
Having all these rules and metrics is fantastic, but what if a power company just decides to ignore them? Well, that brings us to Section 4, Weaponizing Mandatory Compliance.
Get this. Before 1968, compliance with these performance criteria was completely voluntary. Honestly, NERC just relied heavily on peer pressure as the main driving force. But let's be real, peer pressure doesn't exactly stop a cyber attack. Today, in the modern era, membership in NERC and compliance with their reliability standards is absolutely mandatory. We are in a power-up era now, backed by severe, wildly costly monetary penalties for anyone who doesn't conform.
So the absolutely crucial point here is knowing exactly when these massive protections actually kick in. 1,500 megawatts. That is our bright line danger zone. The standards clearly dictate that if a cyber system has common mode vulnerabilities that could result in the loss of 1,500 megawatts or more of generation at a single plant, it absolutely must be protected under the strictest mandates. 1,500 megawatts dropping off the grid instantly is a complete nightmare scenario, so hitting that bright line triggers the absolute highest protection protocol.
And hey, if a massive loss of generation actually does occur, the clock starts ticking, and it ticks fast. 15 minutes. Under the Disturbance Control Standard, or DCS, if a balancing authority suffers a major disturbance, which is defined as losing 80% or more of their single most severe contingency, they have exactly 15 minutes to recover. They get 15 minutes to restore their balance to zero or back to its pre-disturbance value. It is a literal race against time to stop the blackout.
To ensure systems don't just fail in the first place, these entities literally have to execute rigorous protocols, like the ones found in Standard CIP-007-6. The defense objectives here are crystal clear. Reduce the attack surface by preventing any unnecessary access. Quickly identify and mitigate software vulnerabilities. Protect against malicious code. Continuously monitor security events, and strictly prevent any unauthorized electronic access. It's all about maintaining the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, what we call the CIA triad of those critical cyber assets.
Which, naturally, brings us to a pretty heavy question. I want you to just consider the stakes for a second here. What actually happens if an enforcer's shield falls? What happens if a registered entity fails to maintain these rigorous mandatory compliance structures, whether that's just through negligence or an actual targeted attack?
Well, the answer is swift. And honestly, it's devastating. We're talking severe financial penalties for failing NERC CIP compliance audits, fines that can entirely cripple an organization. But beyond just the monetary hit, there is massive reputational damage. And most importantly, failing to maintain these controls leads to a sharply heightened risk of actual grid disruption. Because in this environment, an unprotected vulnerability isn't just a regulatory oopsie, it is a direct, wide-open invitation to shut down the entire system.
And that kind of brings us full circle back to this incredible unified defense system. When you look at these power plants, the transmission lines, the control centers, you now know what's really keeping them running. It's not just the physics of electricity. It's policy, it's enforcement. NERC's overarching standards, the highly focused regional enforcement from groups like the Texas RE, and the modern weaponization of mandatory financially backed compliance. Those are the literal shields keeping the lights on our homes.
But it does leave us with one final, kind of provocative thought. Our adversaries? Yeah, they aren't resting. With cyber and physical threats evolving every single day, growing more sophisticated and way more aggressive, are our mandatory shields and our High Council's rules actually strong enough to defeat tomorrow's villains? That is the ever-evolving, high-stakes world of critical infrastructure protection. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep your eyes open. The grid never sleeps.